Indie sleaze was a very known staple at the time during the early 2010s, and at the time I think it can also be interchanged with the word hipster. And during this time, hipsters were people who dressed in plaid, who liked to listen to obscure music artists or who they thought was obscure, journals, writing, analog technology, coffee, mustaches, fedora hats, glasses with frames but no actual lenses in it, were kind of the epitome of what hipsters were. I feel like they also can overlap with the indie sleaze aesthetic and also the twee aesthetic, which I feel like twee aesthetic mostly pertains to women's fashion that contrived or took a lot of pieces inspired by vintage silhouettes and vintage wear, like Peter Pan collars, dresses and tights. I would say basically the female version of a hipster would be twee. Today we're going to be talking about the birth of indie sleaze or hipster aesthetic and the death, and then also the rise again, because a lot of people are saying that indie sleaze is back. Did it ever go away? We're going to talk about it. So if you're new here, my name is Angel Baby Kyra. Make sure you like and subscribe. Go follow me on Instagram and TikTok. I found this article by Vice. Not that I like Vice, but Vice put a really cool guide to indie sleaze style. I feel like indie sleaze is something that older Gen Z and millennials know of. I feel like the Gen Alpha and younger Gen Z kind of just see pictures from back then. I'm making it sound so old, like it was forever ago, but pictures from back then and like, oh my god, this is so cool, blah blah blah. American Apparel is one that comes to mind. That would be a staple for indie sleaze. Of course, thrifting I feel like would also be cool, a cool part of indie sleaze. Not as much as shopping at Urban Outfitters though, and definitely American Apparel. And some sites from back then that I feel like would contribute to indie sleaze would be like Blogger, what's that one, Polyvore. I feel like would also help with the twee aesthetic and how people got inspiration from each other and just the fashion styles that were at the time. But during this time, it was like the early mid 2000s, so probably about 2008ish to 2012ish roughly. And this is when we see, this is kind of like the alt kids at the time that I would say, instead of the, I guess you would call them normies at the time compared to their fashion, which we can see is another thing that people want to bring back as 2010s fashion, which consisted of like chevron print, tribal print, cut out tank tops with a lace bralette under it, those wedges, those wooden wedges. I feel like this is the alt kid version of what was going on during the time. A lot of it has to do with like bright colors, plaid, like I was mentioning earlier, ballet flats were a really big thing, the infinity scarves were a big thing, and of course like ironic graphic tees. So according to the article, it says, as someone who lived through it the first time around, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what the resurgence of indie sleaze is about. It conjures so many hazy memories of seeing MGMT and the Strokes, drinking Sparks, wearing ballet flats, making out with dudes wearing Richie Tenenbaum headbands or non-prescription glasses. That's what I was talking about. And manically refreshing the Cobra Snake's website or scanning the pages of Vice to see if you made it to any of the shots from last night's party. Let me, a millennial, explain. The funny thing was no one really self-identified as indie or hipster back in the day. That wanted to be on brand and would have been certified cringe by today's standards. This 2006 headline from The Onion put it best. Two hipsters angrily call each other hipster.
The modern hipster label emerged in the early 2000s to describe someone who, according to Robert Lanham's 2003 The Hipster Handbook, possesses tastes, social attitudes, and opinions deemed cool by the cool.
I said I love the Smiths. You've good taste in music.
You like the Smiths?
Yeah.
And who shuns or reduces to kitsch anything held dear by the mainstream.
When you're used to listening to the raw power of Iggy and the Stooges, everything else just sounds kind of like precious.
A lot of the hipsters' cachet is tied up in the idea that they are an arbiter of taste.
Because you're just some wannabe hipster who judges everything because you're too scared to take a chance on anything.
They're experts on high culture and they love low culture, but only with an ironic detachment.
I feel like that's kind of a main difference too with like people having aesthetics back then. It sounds like it's older than it is, but it's only been like maybe like 10 years. Back then, people wouldn't really identify with aesthetics, and I feel like aesthetics weren't really a thing that people actually acknowledged. Of course, aesthetics was always a thing, we just didn't have a name for it. We didn't really have have access to the internet like how we have now, like in our hands, and we don't have constant updates, feeds, seeing fashion in real time and seeing all these trends, fashion aesthetics that people have. So it's a very big difference, and people just pretty much saw what was on blogs, which you pretty much had to be at a computer unless you had like kind of a smartphone that had internet, but even then it was kind of very limited, or you would just see people out in public, and that's what people would wear. One of the main pillars of the decade from 2003-ish to 2012-ish was irony, or as the New York Times succinctly explained in 2012, manifesting a nostalgia for times the hipster never lived himself. This contemporary urban harlequin appropriates outmoded fashions, the mustache, the tiny short, mechanisms, fixed gear bicycles, portable record players, and hobbies. Home brewing, playing trombone. God, I almost forgot about all the mustaches. What was that about? Shout out to everyone walking around with mustaches tattooed on your fingers. I remember mustaches being a very big thing, and I had mustaches on everything. I made my parents get me glasses that were like fake glasses or had the rims taken out. I remember going with friends to the movies and keeping the 3D glasses and wearing them to school, unironically, with the 3D lenses taken out of them, which was so funny looking back at it. And the indie sleaze was very just like a carefree kind of fashion aesthetic, and people just really like to think that they were different compared to the mainstream, and I feel like that's something that a lot of them did acknowledge, was that they kind of went against the mainstream. What was hip then was supposedly like the iPods are coming out, iPod touches, iPod nanos, whatever was coming out at the time, versus them listening to a cassette or their record player. However, there have been attempts, including by Vice, to finally form a definitive understanding of an eulogy for this era. Please refer to our 2015 week of think pieces dedicated to remembering the hipster. This goes into what I was saying earlier about the hipster aesthetic. It says, like witch, communist, and basic, hipster became an indefinable word you can use to smear the other. Ride a bike, you're a hipster. Listen to music, you're a hipster. Drink coffee, hipster. Don't drink coffee, contrarian hipster. Nobody was safe from being called a hipster, and nobody wanted to be one. Hipster has become like, you know it when you see it, but it's impossible to define. So it says, I guess the main takeaway is that hipsters value jeans above everything else, but also that they went to college, read books, lived in Williamsburg, liked obscure things, hung out at Starbucks, drank PBR, did stuff ironically, ate vegetarian food, and used Apple products. And I feel like that's kind of funny because it is kind of what we think of like a tote bag boy or a fashion guy would be today, with their tote bag, going to a coffee shop, living in somewhere like Williamsburg in New York, does stuff ironically, or maybe eats vegetarian food, who knows, and used Apple products with their AirPods, of course. And I think the indie sleaze kind of died out because we were going into more of minimalism, and also the pandemic, I feel like, played a lot into it, where we saw like the clean girl, but at the same time we kind of saw the dichotomy of the like very millennial, the Gen Z version of what millennial fashion was, if that makes any sense, and just Gen Z also interior decorating, which comes into play with hipsterness, the hipster aesthetic, which a lot of people would think of a log cabin, a fireplace, something cozy, and I feel like the hipster is very associated with the season fall because of how you would dress as a hipster. Cuff jeans, plaid, flannel, glasses, fedora hat, maybe a scarf, leather book, messenger bag. So I think it's very much associated with fall, which I feel like not a lot of people talk about. This post is so funny. It says the Cobra Snake, and it's with Katy Perry. This is kind of the epitome of indie sleaze, just very raw and real. Makeup's kind of messy to like no makeup, but not in a clean girl kind of way. And honestly, it just felt like a simpler time where people just honestly did have fun. Another one, indie sleaze, perfect example of indie sleaze. I feel like the indie sleaze, and I agree with the article saying that it's just an echo chamber, because I feel like a lot of people who aren't on TikTok and chronically online are not even dressed this way. I know a lot of people are like, let's bring indie sleaze back, let's bring indie like, you can dress however you want, but I feel like bringing back an aesthetic is just like trying to grab something from another period of time when we're in this certain period, and it's kind of like yearning for nostalgia for a time that most of these people who are saying bring indie sleaze back did not even live through. So of course, like, TikTok is a great way to like spread this idea and aesthetic of indie sleaze with TikTok trend forecasters and just forecasters in general. I don't really think any, like, I don't want to say like real trend forecaster or people who actually work in the fashion industry has said that indie sleaze is making a comeback or we're going to be seeing it. I feel like this happens every 1 or 2 years, that we see like an aesthetic from before make its way around, because we did its cycle with 90s, with the Y2K era, and then of course we're gonna have to go through the mid 2010s, which consists of 2010s basic normie fashion and indie sleaze or the hipster twee aesthetic. Of course, we cannot forget the Tumblr phase, which were pretty much all aesthetics that were taking place during the mid 2010s. Millennials still kind of, I feel like, cling on to this kind of aesthetic, whether or not they realize or admit it. There's also, of course, that very like weird discourse or tension or beef between Gen Z and millennials, which I think is kind of funny. And I just think that indie sleaze, I feel like personally, it needs to be laid to rest, but people are gonna do what they're gonna do. Because many of us millennials are already nostalgic for our hard partying days without having pictures of us with bad bangs from 11 years ago repeatedly resurface on social media. We may be chronically in line, but we're ready to go back to some of the analog tech we held so dear during the last major recession, like film cameras and vinyl records, and may even need to tighten our belts once more by drinking cheap cans of beer instead of $21 martinis. As with many cultural movements that once had some sort of depth or purpose, again, we are still figuring out what that means for indie sleaze. Often, all that remains is an easily digestible form or the aesthetics. We're talking about the deep V's, holy flannels, and huge sunglasses. We're talking about the highbrow versions of indie sleaze, Heidi, Slimane, Alexa Chung, and the every person interpretations, absolutely nutty thrift store mixed and matching. Many of the iconic style staples of indie sleaze do in fact still hold up today. And I feel like a lot of people do pull from the indie sleaze aesthetic, but certain aspects of it, which I think incorporates into 2024 fashion, which I saw a TikTok I was interesting. I'll make into another video that 2024 fashion is ugly, and it's one of the most unique fashion years that I think I've personally seen, because I think we pull from a lot of different aesthetics, like what is considered an it girl or it fashion or whatever. You see them wearing aesthetics like bloquette that mixes the sporty aesthetic, mostly pertaining to Adidas or anything like that, with maybe like a frilly white skirt, or mixing up ballet core with something more sporty, pants and dresses, which was a Y2K trend that a lot of people wore pants and dresses. So things like that, I feel like is cool, that we pick and choose what we like from one era, what we like from the other era, and then bring it back into 2024. And I feel like Gen Z and younger generations are very creative in that way, in which, yes, we can make these aesthetics, like this is Y2K aesthetic, this is make bling, this is bloquette, whatever it is, but then we can also still make it ours. I think that's what makes fashion so fun, is that yes, there are certain things that look good together, but also fashion does not have any rules. The same with makeup, like there are suggestions, but you find what works for you, and I think that's like the most important thing. Do I personally like indie sleaze as a whole? No, I don't anymore, even though I probably was part of the indie sleaze, mostly hipster kind of aesthetic during the time, because that's what I really like. I really liked vintage things and going to the thrift store, and I've always liked things like that, and I was bullied heavily for it during middle school because I would wear clothes that weren't new, clothes that weren't considered hip. I'd wear the Peter Pan collars, like, and other girls were like not wearing that. They were wearing crop tops and high-rise shorts. I feel like that really helped me find myself and my own personal aesthetic, helped develop me as a person, and I feel like fashion is a very good way to find yourself and experiment with things. I think that anyone can do indie sleaze if they really wanted to. I feel like we go through our fashion cycle pretty quickly, and it's just a little overwhelming sometimes seeing all these aesthetics, and like, here's your aesthetic, and then fast fashion comes into play and then capitalizes off of like aesthetics that are trending, like indie sleaze or the hipster hipster aesthetic. But yeah, I think that's the end of this video. That was my thoughts on the revival of indie sleaze that people are saying not surviving, and just the trend cycle and how things are always changing and shifting, and to see where we get our inspirations from when creating new aesthetics that the internet does, whatever it does. Yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.
Why you gotta make it be like that now? I don't know,